Okay, welcome back everybody. This is going to be the big one, the one that everybody has hyped to no end, the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. So let's talk about The Way of Kings. Welcome back everybody to the channel. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I appreciate each and every one of you that watches my videos. So this is going to be my Way of Kings discussion, completely spoiler free. I may do a spoiler talk video after this, but I feel like since this is such a big book, it deserves its own video, so if people want me to do a spoiler chat about it, please drop in the comments and let me know, but let's get into it. So, very brief history for all of you about my journey this year with Brandon Sanderson. I started off with Mistborn, so I absolutely loved Era 1. It is one of my favorite fantasy books and series that I've ever read, and definitely top two or three. I think it's still just below Red Rising this year from what I've read, but absolutely phenomenal. I immediately went into Era 2, which I really didn't like that much. I just don't think it was for me. I didn't like the Western setting. So Sanderson so far was like knocked it out of the park, and then kind of a come down with Era 2. I then went into Secret History, which I also didn't like. I feel like that actually took away from the story of Era 1. And then I went and I read Elantris. So I almost worked my way backwards in Sanderson quality, in my opinion, and I really didn't vibe with Elantris at all. So when I was going into Stormlight Archive, I was thinking, okay, literally every person that I speak to hypes the shit out of this book and the series. Everybody says this is like the pinnacle of fantasy. And having not been like completely on board with everything that Sanderson has written, like I said, I was kind of up and down in between Mistborn eras. I went in with incredibly high expectations, and probably should have tempered them just slightly, because while this book was very good, I did not immediately love it. So let me very quickly, before I go over the book itself, go into just kind of why that was. And it was really just because I expected it to almost grab me immediately, and personally it just didn't. And it took me honestly like 40% of this book for me to actually really get into it and enjoy it. I felt like that first 40% was just kind of, for certain characters, largely repetitive, and I understand that it was a lot of character building and world building. I mean, Sanderson's creating this entire world of Roshar from scratch. It's not traditional medieval fantasy or anything like that, so it's not like he's rehashing old ideas. He's completely building something new, so I greatly appreciated that. It just took longer for me to click with the material than I think a lot of others have, so that's what kind of detracted it for me a bit. But once I got past that point, the rest was smooth sailing. I am definitely on board for the series, and I have a strong feeling that after I get through Words of Radiance and Oathbringer behind me, that I will appreciate what was built in book 1. And again, it was really just a minor. It took me a while to get into it. I'm glad I didn't DNF it, because I did overall like the book a lot. But for me, I could see my biggest critique is that the very beginning was pretty slow. So let's actually get into what this book is about and kind of explain why I thought that. So the very first pages of this book are a prelude, which is set 4,500 years before our current story of the Way of Kings. Now, I actually thought that was very interesting. It was talking about the Knights Radiant, and basically just this entire past history of this section of this book. You jump 4,500 years, and you're introduced to our first character, who I joked about his name on Twitter and Instagram, Szeth Sunsun Villano, Truthless of Shinovar, which was a mouthful. But he was actually a very interesting and mysterious character, and he kind of sets in motion the basis for what this story is, because he assassinates a king. This assassination is basically blamed on a certain section of people or race, and it kind of causes this big war that happens. So these 10 kings band together to go to war with the Parshendi on the Shattered Plains, and that's kind of where our story takes off. The whole reason it took me a while to get into this at the beginning was because right after the prelude and Szeth's kind of intro getting the ball rolling, which was basically a big action scene of this assassination attempt, it just it almost takes a massive step back and then starts building. So like right after this, high action impact scene, then you have character build up with Kaladin and Shallan for, I believe, at least like 100 pages or so. It's really very slow burn to get them going. So for me personally, I just didn't click with either of them immediately. Okay, so briefly about some of the characters. So Szeth, as I said, is mysterious. He's kind of sprinkled in throughout the story. You don't get to know too many details about him, so I'm definitely looking forward to learning more about him. Kaladin is a Dark Eyes, so he is actually part of the lower tier of society in this book, where Light Eyes are kind of the generals, the noble society. They're the ones that kind of run everything. And Kaladin is looked down on for who he is, and he has to struggle with that throughout this book. I actually think he has the best character arc, personally, of the main characters in this story. I feel like he grows the most. His whole character drive is honor and family and friends and trying to fight and defend those that he loves, and he is actually a surgeon, which was essentially because his father was also a surgeon. So he spends a lot of the book trying to do what he can to kind of heal people and save people, because that is a major driving factor of his character. Shallan, when we're introduced to her, she is a Light Eyes, but she is kind of a lower tiered Light Eyes family, so she's not kind of held in super high regard by a lot of people. And when you meet her, she's actually on a boat to go study as a ward for this, not sorcerer, but I believe her name is spelled Jasna. I believe it's pronounced Yasna. But she is what is a heretic to all these people, because most of this world is religious. They believe in the Almighty. And she's a heretic because she questions everything. She believes more in science. And Shallan is going to be a ward for her. So that's kind of where her story starts and takes off from there. And then you also have Dalinar, who you're introduced to, who is a Light Eyes officer in the army. He is part of what you learn is kind of like the magic system and magic wielders of this universe, in that he is a shard bearer. And shard bearers get these awesome weapons called Shardblades, so they are able to wear this badass looking armor and wield these massive swords called Shardblades, and Shard Plate is their armor. Basically makes them super strong. They can run faster, they can beat the crap out of people. These massive swords are lightweight, but they're gigantic, and they're as sharp as anything imaginable, so they just slice right through pretty much anything. And the really cool aspect about this that Sanderson introduced here is these weapons, they summon them. So it takes 10 heartbeats to summon a Shardblade. And basically, if your heart rate is going, you can summon it faster. So in combat, they'll be wielding their Shardblade, they'll drop it, it turns to mist, and then they'll climb a wall or something, and then by the 10th heartbeat, bam, Shardblade's back, they can start fighting again. So that whole aspect was just awesome to me, seeing these guys in combat with these Shardblades, dropping them, resummoning them. Super cool, fantastic idea. All the artwork and stuff that I've seen about these looks fantastic. I would love to see this in a movie, just because it would be totally badass. So that's Dalinar, though, and his son Adolin is also a shard bearer, and he plays somewhat of a minor character role in this. There's a lot of side characters in this, lots of names to remember, not quite as much as something like Wheel of Time or probably what is in Malazan, but there are a lot of character names. Some of them are just introduced and then kind of taken out, but there are a good enough amount of them. You have Syl, who is a Spren. She's actually a Wind Spren, which is another thing that I'll explain in a second. She's kind of like Navi from Zelda, just kind of like following Link around like, hey, listen. You're introduced to a lot of the bridge crew that surrounds Kaladin through his story, and Rock being my favorite. Great comic relief. He's kind of hilarious in almost like a big dumb brute kind of way. You also meet this character Wit, who is sprinkled in very, very lightly, but whenever he's in a scene, he kind of steals the scene. He is witty, obviously. He's known as the King's Wit, kind of where his name comes from. And he is just hilarious in most of the scenes that he's in. He's very interesting and mysterious as well. This book is broken up into parts. So while you have the main plot of the Shattered Plains going, you have Shallan's plot going, you also have each part or section of this book. So you have part 1 to 4, and it follows different characters. And it'll tell you right on there, it'll say, like, this is Kaladin and Shallan's chapter, or this is Szeth, Dalinar, Kaladin, and Shallan. So it tells you what to expect from each section of the book, and in between there's interludes, which is basically just minor characters, at least for the time being. Mostly world building, just kind of one-off thing. Like, some of them you get one little interlude chapter, a couple pages, and then you never hear from the character again. It's really just extra world building. Definitely don't ignore them, because I have a feeling they will come back and pay off later. But some of them you will just kind of be like, what is happening? And then you'll never hear from the person again. So it'll probably be a Wheel of Time thing where like 3 books later that character pops up again. So definitely pay attention to those. To the point of the war that's happening throughout this entire book, the Shattered Plains, they're basically fighting over what is called gem hearts. So gem hearts are essentially a currency in this world, and they're also kind of used for magic, because when you actually breathe in Stormlight, I believe you can power up these gems, and then they eventually run out of power. But that's kind of where all these shard plates and shard bearers are gaining these abilities and powers from, is all these gems. And these are created from these storm events that happen, which there's these massive storms that occur, and for some reason it creates these gem hearts, and this is essentially what they're fighting over for the most part. Speaking of storms, that leads me into my one very minor gripe about the book that a lot of people love. I personally can't stand the goofy fake swearing that is present in seemingly all of Sanderson's books. I mean, I get it, he doesn't want to swear in his books. I don't remember it bothering me quite as much in Mistborn when people were saying rust and ruin and things like that. I mean, Robert Jordan does it in The Wheel of Time with people saying burn you and blood and bloody ashes. And it's here with Stormlight Archive when everyone's telling people to storm off and storm you and just storm this, storm that. It's so goofy for me. I can't get over it. It's not going to pull you out of the book, I don't think. But for me, every time I see that, I'm like, just tell them to f*** off. So that's sort of the basic plot, and because you have so many different characters intermingling throughout the plot, I don't want to say too much without, at the risk of spoiling anything. So the basic battle plot is happening throughout. You have Shallan studying as a ward throughout most of the book. That is her main character arc. And you have Szeth in the background kind of being dropped in with his, assassinations and things like that, because that is his character. One of the very interesting things that I found about this world building is, you have the Stormlight magic system, which obviously is more soft than Mistborn was with Allomancy, but it's still very interesting, and he's doing a lot of unique things with it. And aside from the actual magic system, you also have Spren, which when these showed up at first, I was kind of confused as to what they were. But essentially, they're living creatures. They're almost like little fairies that people can only see them that they want to be seen by. And there's Sprens for essentially everything. So there's Wind Spren, which is one of our side characters, Seal? I think it's Sil, who follows Kaladin around, and she shows herself to Kaladin in kind of like a human form, but she's little. She's kind of like Navi from Zelda, just following Link around, yelling at him like, hey, listen. She gets a lot of characterization in this book, and I want one. She's kind of cool. I want a little Sil following me around. There's also Pain Spren, there's Wind Spren, there's Light Spren, there's basically anything that exists, add Spren to it, and there's probably one of those. So like Rot Spren, if a person's dying, Rot Spren kind of come to the wound, I guess, and like make it more infected. So I would definitely say overall that the main plot of the story is not necessarily super unique, but Sanderson is adding that twist and world building and setting that is entirely unique and brand new to fantasy, I would think. And that's understandably where probably a lot of this praise comes from, is because this guy is so creative, and to just think of the things that he's thinking of are just boggling to me. The setting is definitely not something that I've seen before. Once again, Sanderson is fantastic with characters, and while I was a little bit almost bored at the beginning, the character arcs that every character goes on in this book is super fascinating, and I've told many people this already. By the end of the book, I really loved our main cast. Shallan, I initially didn't like. I loved her by the end of the book. Kaladin, I initially didn't like. I loved him by the end of the book. Dalinar, I loved since he was introduced, and I loved him at the end of the book as well. Szeth is really interesting. I want to see where all these character arcs go. I want to see how involved the side characters get in Words of Radiance and Oathbringer and beyond. Overall, very much like the book. Very slow at the beginning for me. It grew on me towards the 40% mark, and then, like I said, smooth sailing from there. I ended up really, really liking the book. I don't know if I love it yet. I'm going to hold off on that just because I want to see where some things go. But I have a feeling that if Words of Radiance does less of the sort of like structure, foundational groundwork, and just gives me 1,200 pages of awesome character growth and plot movement, I will like it a lot more than Way of Kings, and to the point where it'll probably tip it over into the love for me. I would, right now, as far as like Sanderson tiers go, I would have Mistborn above it because I finished that trilogy and absolutely loved every second of it. This would be slotted in right under it, and then Era 2 and Elantris can just be like, I don't know, like down here somewhere. But that's all of the Sanderson stuff that Secret History is like under my foot somewhere. I am definitely interested in Stormlight as a magic system and kind of just like part of this world. I want to see where all these stories are going, and I want to follow these characters. And even though I didn't initially like the book that much, I just thought it was a little bit too slow for me. By the end of it, I did really like it, and I am definitely invested. I mean, I already own the other books. I have Rhythm of War pre-ordered because I have a feeling that I'm already going to like it more than I did halfway through this book. So let me know in the comments down below some of your favorite moments. Who's your favorite character? Yell at me if you want to. Thumbs the video down if you think I was too hard on it, saying that I didn't enjoy it at the beginning. But those have been my spoiler-free thoughts on the book. Again, please, if anybody wants me to go through a spoiler-full chat, I would happily do that as well, because I do have a lot of thoughts on the book. It is a behemoth of a book, so there's plenty to talk about and plenty of theories to toss around. So I would love to do that if there's interest, and definitely looking forward to Words of Radiance that I will read next month. So until next time, everybody, keep reading.